My grandfather was a farmer, several hundred acres. He had cotton fields.
My dad was the oldest, and he was always the one working side by side with my grandfather.
My mother told him he could do anything he wanted to except farming.
Mom's kind of like, you haven't been telling me what you're going to do. What have you decided to do? He goes, well, I'm going to be a dentist. My parents were about making a difference in the lives of people.
They were just big givers.
My parents were always the first ones to get to church in the morning and the last ones to leave.
The Christian faith is foundational to our families.
Lloyd Reed was the first. Then Kevin Reed came in '82. And Taylor came in with me in 2017.
They've always had the mission statement at the forefront. That was the first thing they came up with, was the mission statement.
Now I was preparing this for the third generation for my son, and I wanted it to be the best it could possibly be. In the business and in my life has been, I want to do things that make a difference in the lives of people. And I saw my dad had that intention. Cornerstones of Dad's career would be, we're going to be fair to people. We're going to be trustworthy people. We're going to be honest. We're going to be truthful. We're going to have compassion.
I think they'd be so proud. I think they'd be so proud Taylor came in. I do.
That's our story. That's where we are.
My grandfather, I think, considered himself rich just because he had a whole lot of land and because he was able to do a lot of things. This is my dad's dad.
He was a trader, and he would go to different places and homes and ranches or whatever, farms.
At the first farm, he'd say, you got something you want to sell or trade, something I can take to the market for you.
They said, well, I would like to sell this pig. Well, I'll give you $25 when I come back from the sale. I'll take the bill.
Put a rope on that hog, walk to the next farm. You got anything you want to sell or trade? By the time he got to the railroad station, it had a whole crop of stuff.
And then he'd pick all that stuff up in the trailer, truck, and haul it to Nashville. There'd be a sale that day.
Walk back across the county and pay those people. All word of mouth. My grandfather.
My grandfather was farming, shared land and farmed with his brother, Usher, U.T. Reed, and his father. In the 40s is when my grandfather moved down here in Tipton County. Well, what you do when he moves down here, he buys 800 acres on Simmons Road.
The entrance to his farm was a gravel driveway that went right by his house. I learned to drive there. I drove every truck he had before I was 14. My grandfather lived independently in a home in Atoka. When he was in his early mid-90s, he would walk 3 miles or so every day to the general store and sit and talk and chat and all for 6 hours and then walk home. My grandmother on that side, my grandfather called her Shug for sugar. She was up every morning griping how much smoking he was doing. And she was smart, she was well-read. She pushed my grandfather to go to church. I don't know that he would have gone without her, but she and my grandfather played cards almost every night. It always amazed me. They'd play cards till 10:30 at night and then be up at 4:30 in the morning every day.
My dad was born in 1920. Depression would have been about 28. My dad was always the one, the oldest, and he was always the one working side by side with my grandfather. So Dad was, at 10 years old, estimating how much your pig weighed and how much he was going to give you. So you not only had to estimate how much it weighed, but you had to estimate what you thought the market was going to be when you got to the sale.
I mean, by the time he could, then he didn't have to have a driver's license, I don't guess. He said he would haul a truckload of cattle to Nashville and sell them. And
there's some learning going on, Dad said one time. Dad is just like 10, 11 years old. He's just, he's been given this responsibility and he screwed up. He made a mistake. I said, what did Granddad do? He said, well, he was quiet for a little bit and we're just driving down the road. He didn't say anything mean. And then he goes, well, you figured that one wrong. You won't next time. You'll be fine. That's how you learn. It's okay. So at 16, he graduated from high school, went to UT Martin for a year, and did a year of engineering. And Granddad sat him down and he said, look, you're the oldest, I got 5 more after you, and yeah, I can't send you back to school. If you go to college, I'll have to be down the road on your own. It's not something I can do. My mother grew up in Darden, somewhere north of Lexington. Pretty big family. The Dukes were a big family. My mom came from a family called the Skates. They were a big family.
She was great. She's just real sweet, loves kids, you know, just was willing to help in any way.
She was the oldest. She had 3 sisters under her. Well, 2 of them were twins. So the ones right under her were twins, Marie and LaRue.
Mama Duke, she was the oldest in her family. Daddy Duke was the youngest. They went to church. My granddaddy led the Daddy Duke's what we called him, Mama Duke and Daddy Duke. He led the singing. He taught classes in shape notes back then.
Daddy Duke was a very small farmer with a few cows maybe, but he was a teacher. He thought college was the thing, and you know, he needed educated.
He farmed, but he had gone to college enough that he taught, and he was some kind of political position in Lexington.
And Mama Duke is this little, slight, small, petite woman, mild and very sweet, and
you know, she made quilts. She had go across the road. She had chickens, and she would do the eggs, and then.
And she was the best cook you've ever eaten. I mean, it's not even close. You know, my parents, they started dating near Lexington. It was at that time that he got noticed, and so he went in the service. So he goes in the service, he comes back from boot camp, and he asked my mom to marry him. She said, I don't know, I'm gonna have to think about that. He said, okay, that's fine, I understand. Well, I love you and I'd really like to marry you. I'll be back home in 2 weeks. You let me know. Because if you're not interested in 2 weeks, I'm moving on. Daddy Duke. I told my mom, said, well, you don't want to marry that boy. He's never gonna be anything. He's just gonna be a farmer or something like that and work with his dad. And so he came back in 2 weeks, and they went over to the minister's house, either arranged it or knocked on the door. They got married in his living room, so they had 2 witnesses and the preacher, and they eloped, and then came back to Mom's house to present themselves, were married. Well, Daddy Duke is livid. Mama Duke raised her voice, and she says, so Audie, what are you thinking about not accepting that young man into our life? She's married him. They're married now. So you want a divorce in the Duke family. You just go ahead and we'll just have a divorce. Is that what you're saying? We're gonna love this young man and we're gonna bring them in the house. And that's how that started.
Mom and Dad, they got married, and then Dad was in the military at Millington. He was an instructor.
When Dad leaves the service, what my mom said when she married him, she said, I'll marry you, I want to marry you, but I want one thing clear, that I'm not going to be a farmer's wife.
My mother told him he could do anything he wanted to except farming.
I'm going to want you to commit to getting an education. And Dad said, okay, yeah, I'll find something to do, that's fine.
The war was over in August, and he must have come out and then gone right into Memphis getting his courses.
So they're on the train coming back home, and now they're coming to Memphis, and Mom's kind of like, you haven't been telling me what you're going to do. What have you decided to do? Because you promised me. He said, well, I've got to go back to college. You'll get a job there in Memphis. She said, well, what are you going to do? He goes, well, I'm going to be a dentist. You're going to be a dentist. Well, why aren't you going to be an engineer? You went to school for a year for engineering. He goes, well, I could do engineering. I think it's interesting, but I mean, I talked to those instructors that year I was there. I mean, they don't make any money. I'm not gonna go 4 years to school and not make any money. I'm gonna do a dentist and I'll figure out my own business. I won't do well working for somebody else. I'm gonna run my own show.
So, I mean, he wouldn't have known very much pursuing this path.
And she said, well, how would you pick dentistry? He said, well, there was a doctor in town.
He remembered the dentist that was on the square in Lexington. That would have been the professional person that he would have had contact with.
When I would get out of school, growing up, we lived far enough out, I had to catch a ride home. So I had to have an hour before I could get home. And I started going down to the dental office, and I would just sit in the reception room. And after a while, I guess I was a nice kid, and they said, you want to come back here and see what we're doing? So I watched him work a lot, and I've always thought I could do that. So they lived on Inez Street. While Dad was in dental school, Mom did executive secretary for the theater's executive guy, the warehouse space there where Crosstown is now. So instead of Mom being able to go to college, which is what her dad would have wanted her to do, now they're married, they have a child, they moved back here, Dad's going to school. So she had money she had saved up. She said, well, I'll just spend that money to help you get through school. And said, I've got this good job. Well, then when Dad got out of dental school and they moved to Millington.
I always liked it. It was a great place to grow up.
Oh, it was idyllic. I mean, seemed to have free range to do what I wanted to do. I rode a bicycle all over town without any trouble.
It was very happy, easy. Went to church a lot. Did a lot of music. Took piano and organ.
My sister was 7 years older, so there's a fair amount of distance between us. Kevin was always the younger brother, so we were almost 5 years apart. Vacation-wise, we were usually at the lake, Paris Landing, Kentucky Lake, Tennessee there. Dad bought a boat, single-hull black-bottom ski boat. I remember the first year we had it, we went down to the beach, and then we went to McKellar Lake for years.
And all summer, I would invite two friends. We'd go to the lake and we'd water ski, and my mother would fry chicken and make a dessert and everything. We saw Elvis there.
Ran into Elvis Presley there frequently. He was easy to notice because he had a really fancy, nice boat.
Everybody loved him. Everyone had something to do with Elvis, you know.
I was young at that time. My sister was very excited about seeing Elvis. Later, we'd go to Paris Landing.
Regularly reserved rooms for all of us at Paris Landing. I got the boat ready, took it up there.
And he'd drive the boat all day.
And skied himself sometimes.
We'd go 3 times a year, usually June, July, August.
He was great at family adventures, and that was one of them.
December 1949, Dad gets out of dental school. He sets up in Millington. They lived in an apartment for a year before he was able to move into a house. They started in a little bitty area. The ceiling was leaking so much when it would rain. His only employee was my mom, and she would have to take buckets. They didn't have enough buckets, so she'd have to move them around so that she'd eventually catch enough rainwater that the whole place wasn't flooding out. They worked together for 6 to 9 months, and then his next door neighbor had a little sister that was 20 that had been going to community college, and she said, my little sister really needs a job if you know of anybody, if you ever need anybody, if you know anybody that needs it. And Dad said, I need somebody right now. I mean, that was not working out real well. Dad said every time he'd have, and my mom said too, every time he'd have a child, and the child would start crying, my mom would get on to my dad. That he wasn't being nice. And Dad was like, he couldn't get yes, I'll hire her, you know, she come on in. Francine stayed with him 30 years. So Francine was his first employee. Then he moved up the street to across from the location it is now to Kate's Clinic. End of 1950, 1951, he's building his clinic across the street. He built that clinic while he was working in Kate's Medical Clinic. He had a little suite of rooms that he worked in. Then he moved into 4770 Easley and practiced there until 1990.
Well, my dad certainly made it a better church, and he contributed a lot to the city. He was right in on all those committees and all those things, and so he made a difference. He was always the deacons meeting, a lot of respect from the minister, and always was a quiet, had a lot of influence in the church for sure.
My parents were always the first ones to get to church in the morning and the last ones to leave. He taught Sunday school lessons for as long as I know. There was always a Broadman commentary that was open on a desk and a Bible where he was studying his Sunday school lesson that he was teaching.
The church was huge for them in Millington. In fact, when they would go to Pickwick State Park to ski, they came back on Sunday. They could take time away and have a good time, but they always made sure they came back because they felt like they should be at church on Sunday. Their friends were there, their belief system was there, and that extended to the practice too. So.
One of my biggest mantras from the beginning in the business and in my life has been, I want to do things that make a difference in the lives of people. And I saw my dad had that intention. He did it in church, he did it at the office, he did it with his team members. When I was with him forever, she had heart bypass, she had complications, she was out quite a while, 3, 4, 5 months maybe. He stopped by her house every week, gave her a paycheck.
The way he dealt with people and his fairness with people, honesty with people no matter what.
The cornerstones of Dad's career would be, we're going to be fair to people. We're going to be fair to team members. We're going to be trustworthy people that you can count on us. We're going to be honest. We're going to be truthful. We're going to have compassion. And I would add, he did this, but I would verbalize some more things, and that would be, we're going to be in relationship with you. We're going to be in relationship with our team. I got those feelings from my dad, from my mom and dad. They were that kind. My mom did that at church. I can tell you how many women tell me over the years when they were like 15, 20 years younger than Mom, but they were in her Sunday school class, and how she changed their life. So she did it in her world. If I saw that, my parents were about making a difference in the lives of people. Dad was cutting edge. He was one of the first dentists when dentists started changing from standing up the entire time, if you can believe that, in the 50s. By the late 50s, he was doing sit-down dentistry. Around 1960, it was also a big change, converted from belt-driven handpieces to air-driven. It was able to do the work much more efficiently and less discomfort. He was always looking for a way to make it better for patients. He was trying whatever he could to distract people. He tried a music system he bought that you wear these headphones and supposedly you don't feel anything. He learned hypnotism. He called it relaxation. Don't call it hypnotism, it's relaxation. I saw him do countless patients with hypnotism. I saw him extract teeth with hypnotism.
Did all my dental work with hypnotism. I mean, I did crowns on my teeth without any Novocaine.
And he did all my fillings hypnotism. And then dentistry invented nitrous oxide in the office. He said, Dune, I'm trying that. He puts it in and he quit hypnotism. He finally had found something that relaxed patients because he cared about you and he cared that it bothered you and he knew it did. And it's one of the things in dentistry we hate. We hate the fact that people have that discomfort.
He did a lot of things that other general dentists didn't do because people didn't want to go to Memphis. And specialists, people weren't in that, going to a specialist mode that much, certainly not from Millington. So he would do things that more complicated and more involved as a dentist.
He was always willing to do continuing education to the ultimate. And he really did look for things that would be more helpful. That was typical of him, to try to recognize a problem and figure out how to come up with solutions and then follow through.
I worked at the office at least a couple summers, maybe 3 or 4, when I was in high school, and would be there all day long. I would work as a chairside assistant, which means I worked right next to the patient's mouth running a suction while he was doing operations and stuff. But I saw him dealing with patients that were sometimes a little bit on the ornery side. Never flustered him, never took it personally. His response was always, well, I can see why you'd feel that way. When I was there, this would have been in the 60s. He had a woman that had been working, cleaning his office, named Ivory. He had her working later on at the front desk some, but then he had her working as a chairside assistant. She was right next to him, right in patients' mouths all the time. That was different. I asked him one time, with the way he felt about that, why he had a black colored room in the back of the office. He says, well, I do, but it's not labeled that. And anybody can go there, and anybody can sit in the front waiting room if they want to.
Some places you had to be white to be able to go into their doctor's office or dental office or everything. And from the very beginning, it was fine for him, anyone. And then after a while, certainly before it was a practice, he just didn't use that. He didn't have that waiting room.
Says, I have a lot of farmers that come in here from Tipton County and mud all over their boots and their shoes and everything, and they don't feel comfortable sitting in my main reception area. They feel better coming in the back door, and that's where they go. I don't tell any of them they should sit in the front room or the back room.
He always felt like that anyone that wanted to could come in that front waiting room and come through that door.
Eloyd Reed, it was the first. Then Kevin Reed came in '82, right? We became Reed and Reed. I took it over, bought the new clinic in '90. I learned orthodontics, which was a big part of the practice. Then when I started getting associates in 2000, I labeled it Reed Family Dentistry. And then Taylor came in with me in 2017. The point is, when I came in, Dad welcomed me in. We had a great relationship. We were eating lunch, 3 or 4 days a week. I was like grabbing everything I could from his knowledge base, and we became friends. A dad and a son reunited and became really good friends, which was special. Taylor tells me after in his sophomore year, I want to be a dentist. So now he's in dental school. So he tells me somewhere in that 3rd year that, oh, by the way, I don't think, Dad, I've ever told you. When I graduate, I want to come out and work with you. All right, let me get back to you. I said, I'll get back to you about that. We'll talk about it. That sounds good. That's what I want to, and sounds good. Let me get back with you. So I got back with him, and I sat down with him, and I said, now, Taylor, I went in with my dad, and the way he presented it to me was I needed to work a year with him and as an associate, and then decide if I wanted to stay. If I wanted to stay, he'd work out a buy-in. So what I'm offering you is what I've offered every associate for the previous 5. You can work for me for 2 years as an associate. At the end of 18 months, you'll need to tell me you want to be here permanently. At some point, we'll have that conversation that you're going to stay. Oh, okay. And I said, that's it. That's as far as I'm committing. I said, because here's the thing, son. You just got married. You've never practiced as a dentist. And you've always lived in East Memphis. You and Elizabeth need to have the opportunity to make a choice. And it needs to be your choice after you know that it's the right choice. And if you tell me at the end of 18 months or 2 years, you say, Dad, it's been great out here and I really liked it, but I don't like the drive, or I want to live in Collierville, or we want to move to Chattanooga, or whatever you tell me, I'm going to tell you that when you tell me that, I'm going to cry. Then I'm going to get over it. And I'm going to do everything I can to stand you up and get you in place wherever it is you want to be. 6 months in, I still don't know what he's going to decide, but 6 months in, somebody on my team posted on Facebook a picture that they had taken, and there's Taylor working on a patient, and there's Dr. Kevin working on a patient in side-by-side cubicles right there in that clinic. And it said something about father and son. I don't remember. As I read it, I started tearing up. But I remember what I wrote for the comment. I said, this has been such a blessing. I now know how my dad felt 35 years ago. And I didn't when I came in. It wasn't until that moment that I understood what the dad felt. My dad wasn't the type to, sit around. I didn't do that with Taylor. I didn't sit around and get all sentimental about it, That's a pretty cool moment. My dad said, I had my kidney taken out a couple of years ago. Yeah, Dad, I know you got your kidney taken out. Well, there's a big mass there now. He was about 60, and he kind of teared up, and he said, I'm going in Monday, and I'm not sure what it is, but I just want you to know something. I love you. And I'm proud of you. And I always have been. And you're gonna always be okay. Now, turned out to be an infection. Been sitting there for 3 years after that other surgery and finally came to the outside, and that's not what it was. It was not cancer. But that was huge for my dad because my dad never said that. I don't know, Dad was a hoot. He didn't feel good necessarily, but the last 10 months he was bedridden. Whatever that feeling is, it's almost like it wasn't sadness, but when he said, wow, I've had a great life, and I know that. I know I don't have long, but boy, so many more things I'd still like to do that I hadn't done. I love that in a way, because that's the way I would love to live, is that I always feel like, boy, there's some runway out there. I still got a place to go. There's still some more things I want to do. I love that image. It's never going to be about parking the jet. My mom was a wonderful person. Every time I left her, she'd say, hey. She named every one of them. She said, you go home And you be sure and tell Whitney and Ruthie, you call them and tell them you saw me today, and you tell Philip and you tell Taylor that I prayed for every one of them today, and I pray for them every day, and I love them. And she would always tell me that. My mom died when she was 90 and a half. The night before she died, and she'd been getting weaker, right? And so I walked over to the side of the bed, and I just had, there's a chair there, and I just pulled a chair up, and I just sat there. Her eyes were not open, Sam. This is a real story, okay? She goes, "Kevin, is that you?" Just started speaking. "Yeah, Mom, it's me. Can you see me?" "No, but I just felt like that was you there." She said, "You've been working all day?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Well, you need to go home. You need to go home to your wife and your people. I love them, and I've been praying for them today. And when you go home, you tell Taylor and Philip and Whitney and Ruthie and your sweet wife, Lynn." I said, "Okay, Mom, I will." So I left. Halfway to the front door, and then it hits me. Wait a minute. I went back. I walked in, sat down, patted her hand. She goes, "Is that you again, Kevin?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "Did you forget something, honey?" "I did, Mom, I forgot something." I said, "What was that?" "I forgot this." And I leaned over and gave her a big kiss, and I said, "I love you." And she says, "Well, I love you too, honey." And I left.
So I went in and I sat down next to her, woke her up a little bit and talked to her. "Oh, I'm so glad you came." I said, "Really?" "Yeah," I says, "I've just had a great night. I've seen your dad and my dad and our grandparents." I said, "Dad, where'd you see them?" "Oh, they're in heaven." I says, "Oh, okay. You saw them last night?" "Yeah, I'm going to go see them today." "Do what?" Says, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're there. They're waiting on me. They tell me they're ready for me. I'm coming. I'm going to go see them today." And then she goes off to sleep. And I'm sitting there, I check her pulse, everything's okay. And I'm like, okay, now what I do?
Next morning, my brother calls me. She could be going out on us.
So I call and tell both of them, and I say, I'm gonna wait a little while longer, but if she doesn't recover, I think we need to send her on to the hospital. So we sent her to the hospital, and she was in the hospital 3 or 4 hours.
He put her in the hospital, she died that afternoon. My grandmother died when she was 80. As early as my mom could remember, my grandmother, her mother, she had this one rose bush, a southern rose bush. In 1960, they had to move over to this new house. She took the rose bush with her. Now it's 76, 77, something like that. She dies in 80. Here's this rose bush. It was the rose bush. She'd cut it in half. She said, "I've cut my rose bush in half. And I'm gonna give one of them to Marie, your sister, and I'm gonna give one of them to you. Because I know Lloyd has lots of roses and he takes care of roses." And Dad did, he always had 35 or 40 rose bushes. As a matter of fact, when he retired after 72, he and Mom once a week during blooming season would go to the different hospitals and take bouquets of roses to people in the church they knew. And they called him, the people that worked at the hospital would see him almost every week, and they'd go, "Oh, there's the rose man, there's Mr. Roses," So, when my mom had to move out of her house and went to assisted living, I stopped by and she said, "Hey, I gotta show you something." She takes me out to Dad's rose. He had a rose garden in the day that had 35 plants, right? Well, right in there, Mom, was that rose bush. Nobody had done anything to it for 4 or 5 years. Okay, it's living there with the knockout roses. That's Mama Duke's. That's my mama's rose bush. And I want you to have it. Because I know Lynn will take care of it. She loves flowers and she'll take care of it. And I want that. And she told me the story. That's so important to my mom. And I want y'all to have it. So I called our landscape guy, said, "Albert, I got a rose bush at my mom's house that I got to get out and move to my house. It's like 85 years old and I don't want to kill it." So they put it, it's right over there. And Lynn's got it, and so now it's almost 100 years old. What's special to me is I use it in a lot of talks because what it means to me is that's a metaphor for my life, that's a metaphor that can be for people's lives, it's a metaphor that can be for a community, it's a metaphor that can be for your business. That's how things last 100 years. Somebody's constantly taking care of them, pruning them, cutting it back when they need to, splitting it if they need to. Let somebody else handle something about it when they need to. But never ignoring it because it's important. A culture in the office is like that rose bush. I had a great set of parents. I had a great mentor in my dad. I had a great role model by both of them about how to be with people and how to love your children. My parents were good people. Good people, and they started a business together. I'm very pleased that I've had a wife that has supported what we've done with this coming forward. She's been extremely valuable and supportive of me, and she's given me all the time I've needed to do something that she knew I felt was very important.
They were just big givers. I mean, he was a part of anything Millington had to do city-wise, and I think that's what had Kevin get so involved. So you try to be ingratiated into that town, but they all knew him from his father anyway.
And I knew in Millington, this is my hometown. I mean, this is my heart. This is where I want to make a difference.
He became part of the Millington Chamber of Commerce. He got to know all the business people. And
a proud moment for me when I was asked to be president of the Chamber of Commerce of Millington. It was 1999 when I was president-elect. So the city was at a real crucial time, and it needed to develop economically. And I really felt led that I had the skills to help that be better. And I wanted to do it. I just treated that job as if I was a full-time executive director of the Chamber of Commerce. And I decided that it needed a new vision, so I dove in. We came up with a funding plan that it would take to have a full-time executive director. Chamber would be a key factor as to why industry would see that the community is doing better. Then one guy spoke up, and that was the death knell. He said, well, Kevin, we like this. And we never thought this could happen in Millington, and you seem to show us a path. And we raised it, and it's changed the direction of the chamber. I'm really proud of that. 20 years later, we have a chamber that is supported by its own budget with a full-time executive director, full-time admin assistant, and it's a major contributor to the economic health of Millington, and I was a big part of doing that. We started the Millington Education Foundation when I was chamber president, all during that time. Started it with $25,000. We would take the proceeds, which is $2,500 or whatever it was, and we would spend that for the community schools, find things to spend it on. And we started the M&M Bowl, which is Millington and Mumford football game. Now, today, they have all kinds of tailgating. They have 5,000 people, and I think it's pretty cool.
I admire Kevin's father, who was the end-all, be-all, part of everything. And then we went from, a staff of 4 or 5 with his dad to 18. His dad never said a word to where he wanted to fly with it. They've always had the mission statement at the forefront. That was the first thing they came up with, was the mission statement. So that's always been at the forefront, and patients have been at the forefront, but also his staff has been at the forefront.
And my dad mentioned that to me when he showed me the practice. He said, I won't have deaf ears. He can come and talk to me about anything he wants, and I plan on still practicing, which is the beauty of our relationship and the beauty of my dad's relationship.
He built that building, was buying the practice from his father. It's like he didn't even hesitate. I was like, okay, here we go. He just plowed in there.
She never once complained about anything. She just supported me, and been blessed with a great support group. I've got my parents, my wife, and my siblings, fantastic people. Basically, it's centered around relationships, that you develop relationships. It's not just fixing teeth, but you establish relationships that allows patients to see you for who you are, and for you to see them for who they are, and treat them as human beings with compassion. And so that's what I see is happening with Taylor. He's going to take over the legacy, and that'll have a great feeling of worth. And there again, there's that feeling, making a difference in the lives of people and being able to live that and see it.
It'll be out of our hands and in his hands, and he'll do with it how he wants to do with it. But I don't worry about it at all.
He will be trustworthy. like my dad was, like I have been, that you can count on what he says. He will have highest integrity, he'll have great honesty, and he'll be a super leader with his team.
When you look back, you can see God's handiwork in your life, and I think the Christian faith is foundational to our families, and it's important for our future generations to know that.
And I always say, I don't know how much longer I've got, and as long as I feel good and I'm a contributor, I'm going to be here. I look forward to the next 25 years, but I won't be practicing dentistry in 25 years, which will be 100. But I hope I'm there cutting the cake.
I remember my dad telling me that toward the end of his life. He was about 13. He was doing all the plowing for the 200 acres they have, I guess.
And he's out there all day, sun up, sun down, right? It's July.
And he was plowing with a mule. And
A lot done, moving fast, pushing that mule. Mule fell over.
the mule dropped dead on him. And he was not looking forward to telling his dad about that. But at dinner time that night, he says, "Oh, I got bad news, Dad. The one and only mule we have to pull our plow died today."
My granddad said, "What time did you get out here today?" "Well, sun up."
And he says, "Well, I figured you walked every step the mule did, didn't you?" He said, "I did." He says,
"When's the last time you gave the mule some water?"
"When you stopped to get water, did you give him a mule water?" If you didn't, you should have.
"All right, mule died. You made a mistake. We'll do better next time."
And that was the end of it.
That's just a great learning story. I saw those type of things in my dad. There's a classic story, it's a legend. My dad may not have envisioned it with me, but he practiced in such a way that he exemplified this story. So Socrates, back in the day, he's paid by the king to just study life and make things better. 20 guys that are following him around everywhere, his little troop of people, his believers, and they go, "Oh," they called him master. "Oh, master, we want to learn everything we can from you and be like you." And he goes, "No, that's not what I want for you." And they look like, "What do you mean it's not what you want for us?" He says, "That's not my job. My job is to be a firm foundation with solid roots that you can climb up on and get on my shoulders and reach as high as you can reach, because you will reach higher than I could ever reach. But I'll be the foundation." And that's what my dad did for me. And that's what my vision is for Taylor.